Welcome to today's webinar on accessible hyperlinks and tables, brought to you by the Instructional Technology Resource Center. My name is Mark Cooper, and joining me on the call today are Lisa Kidder, Ryan Randall, Paul Lynch, and Rick Fowler. And a little overview for today's session. Since we are talking about accessible hyperlinks and tables, we will talk about what those are. And we'll also talk about why you should make your hyperlinks and tables accessible and how to do that. And then finally, we'll end up the session with some time for your questions. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who will talk about what are accessible hyperlinks and tables.
Thank you, Mark. So first, we're going to talk about what are accessible hyperlinks and table. There are 4 underlying principles of the accessibility standards. The first one is perceivable. So something, in order for it to be accessible, has to be perceived, whether it's text, audio, video, the fact that it's a link. There has to be some way for somebody to perceive it. Many of our phones also have that haptic interface, so we can actually feel it. So that perception can be felt as well as seen or heard. The next principle is operable. In other words, once we perceive something, we need to be able to operate within that technology piece. We've all had that experience where somebody has shared a Word doc or a PDF with you, and you can see that there is a link, but when you put your mouse over it, it does not work. It does not go anywhere. It's not operable. The next one is understandable. So not only do we need to perceive it and it works, we need to understand what's going on. So if I click this link, I need to understand what that's going to do. In the early years of the internet, that was a lot of the training, teaching people how hyperlinks worked. If I access something, I need to be able to understand exactly what's going. If it's all written in Russian or Greek, that would cause a problem. So it wouldn't be understandable, even though it's perceivable and operable. You might not know whether that's the on or the off button. The last principle is robust, and a lot of this happens behind the scenes, making sure that if something doesn't work, it fails gracefully. In other words, that 404 page that, oh, this page doesn't exist anymore, but you can still get back to the home page. You're not painted into a corner in the technology with nowhere to go. So these 4 principles, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, are the underlying principles. So now let's take a little bit at what hyperlinks are. They're navigational signposts. They tell us where we're going and what we're going to find there. They should be human readable. In my icon here on the screen, there's a street sign, and so there's some fake street signs there in the icon, but there's no words on there. You can tell it's a street sign, you can perceive it, but you can't understand what those lines are saying. So there needs to be a human readable aspect with your hyperlinks. The text that you use should include what it is that the link is and where you're going. Ultimately, as we work through everything, and especially with hyperlinks, we want to reduce the obstacles to people. We want to make sure that the content, that the technology is seamless, and that whoever is interacting with the information that is presented in this digital format, that they can interact with the information and get what they need and accomplish the tasks that they need to do. Accessible tables have clear header rows and column rows. Please note that this is header, not heading. So previously we did a webinar about headings and paragraph structures where you get a heading 1, heading 2, those types of things. A header row and a table is not the same thing. An accessible table does not have any merged cells. And it's not an image of the table either. Tables should be used not for layout, but for organizing information. And so the image prevents somebody, creates that obstacle from accessing the actual information. So as you think about it, if you look at the icon that I have here, there's a circle in the middle and there's 4 arrows kind of going north, south, east, west. And if you're in that center place in a table, that's that cell, you should be able to know what's above you, what's below you, what's to the right, and what's to the left. So the data should be organized. Let's see what that could look like. So here's a table. It has a visual header row. We've put bold in there. There's a little underline, so there's some visual things, but the table's also been indicated that that's the header row. You can do that oftentimes where it repeats on the pages or freezes at the top of your spreadsheet, those types of things. I have some students here with majors in their classes. So if I orient myself on the name Westover, if I go all the way up to the top, I can tell that that is a last name. I know that the what cells just above me and just below me are also last names. If I move to the right or the left, I'm going to go that way, that's my first name. So I can see that Liam is the first name that's associated with Westover. There's a relationship there. And that's what the table is presenting. If I move to the right, suddenly I get this math 1143. If I look up at the top and I'm like, oh, that's the person's class. So that math 1143 is associated with Liam Westover, who is majoring in physics. So there's a relationship there, and the information is organized in a way that somebody in any cell can orient themselves to what's being presented. So next, we're going to talk a little bit more about why accessibility is important. Take it away, Paul.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So this first thing, location, 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 or looking at where links take us under the operable aspect of accessibility standards. So if we are to treat these hyperlinks as signposts, we want to know that we can trust that they're going to take us to where they're leading us, right? Where they're guiding us. So we have this first link. So again, we can and even should expect that the link is going to take us to where it says it's going to take us. So here we have this descriptive link, accessible hyperlinks on WebAIM. So I click on that link. I should expect to go to the WebAIM website. And here I can see, I have a screenshot at least of the links and hyperlinks page on WebAIM. Now let's say this is a link in a course. It's been a few semesters since we last taught it. I mean, the link is still there. Over time, it is possible that the destination that a URL takes us may change. So we want to make sure that we're just double checking those links. So let's say, again, it's been a few semesters. I forgot to check this particular link. I go to click on it, or a student goes to click on it, and instead of taking me to that WebAIM page, it takes me to this very fun and thankfully harmless and timeless GIF of Rick Astley. So just take note of that. In this particular instance, no harm, no foul. It's kind of a nice little fun thing. It's a good chuckle, things that students will talk about over and over again. But it's also a reminder that we're going to want to make sure to double check where those signposts are leading us. Is this link taking me and my students to where I want it to take us? The other thing is we want to enhance the readability of our hyperlinks. So I know it's only been a few seconds since I switched slides, but take a moment and try to recall the link I had. Was it a URL or was it a descriptive text? So what I just put up, I have two different types of links. The first one on the left is the one I had on the previous slide, and that's a descriptive link. So we can see I have a brief description about where the link is going to take us. I have an expectation of what I should see when I click on it. So accessible hyperlinks on WebAIM. We already saw the screenshot. We know what it looks like, and that descriptive text aligned with the content on that page. That's in comparison to the link on the left, that is a URL. We can get some information contextually from it. So, okay, webaim.org. It'll take me to the WebAIM website, so I know I can expect that. We read it a little more. Okay, techniques, hypertext, link. So I know it's going to generally be something that I'm kind of looking for, right? I still don't quite know if I click on it. It's like maybe it's a little bit of a risk, but it's like, okay, I know I have a general idea, right? But we can see a difference in clarity between the two links. And so we really want to consider that when we're writing that descriptive link for these URLs. Another thing we want to take into consideration for our students who may use screen readers, if we have a screen reader, it'll see this first one and it'll read accessible hyperlinks on WebAIM. They'll get a general idea of a reasonable expectation again. What is going to be on that page? Where is that destination going to, or what's the destination going to be for that link? Versus the URL, you will hear something to varying degrees of https://webaim.org/techniques. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but you get an idea, right? It's going to read the full URL and it may not be as clear to that particular student who's using any kind of screen reader. So really, as far as links go, just to kind of tie it all up, we want to make sure we're providing clear context and guidance. We want to make sure that we are sharing with people the types of content that they can expect to see, and that they should also be able to expect that it will take them to the spot that we want those links to take them. And then, why make them accessible? Specifically the tables part of this. So as we saw in Lisa's part of the webinar, we want to make sure to design them to be easily navigable. And again, that's falling under that operable characteristic of accessibility standards. Presentation. Is it presented in an easily digestible format? So again, referencing that table that Lisa presented, there wasn't a lot of information, but what was there was marked very clearly. It was easy to take in that information. Now, not all tables are necessarily going to be that simple. We may run it into more robust tables. So maybe in that case, we may have to make a decision and be like, okay, is this the best way to present this information? For tables, sharing more information, maybe we need to review it and be like, okay, is there a way to break this up into a smaller set of tables while still being able to communicate the primary content, the primary information we're trying to share? So that is something we may need to consider as we're looking at tables, as we're looking at building them and presenting them in our courses. The last item is as we build these tables and we build them accessibly, we're also building them to be inclusive. So really, we're looking at improving the experience for all learners. And by doing this, we can also take into accountability the wide variety of devices that students may use, different types of screen sizes. There's a lot of different screen sizes. So if we can build it to be adaptable to those hardware needs and considerations, then we're doing a really good job at presenting these tables in an accessible and inclusive manner. So next, Ryan's going to share with us how we can actually build and make these accessible links and tables.
Great. Thank you, Paul. So how do you make accessible hyperlinks and tables? The thing I'm going to stress the most is use the tools that you have available on whatever platform you're using. And the second thing I'm going to stress is that if you're someone who likes to draft elsewhere than in the platform, so if you like to make a draft in Microsoft Word or Google Docs, I highly recommend that you do so in Google Docs, because the tools that Google Docs use are much easier to copy and paste from into other platforms than the ones in Microsoft Word. Microsoft Word, unfortunately, its behind the scenes formatting doesn't play nicely with many other platforms. So if you do want to do that sort of drafting somewhere before going into a learning management system or another content management system like Pressbooks, I'd recommend doing that drafting in Google Docs. So what you can see here on the screen are images of two different tools. The one on the left is what you would see if you were trying to use the link tool. You can see its icon is in the upper right of that image. It looks like one single link in a chain. And you can see that there are two fields. The one that's highlighted is where, if I wanted to, I could copy and paste the URL. And then the one above it that's labeled text, that's where I could add a descriptive phrase for that link, that more accessible wording. Then on the right, what you can see is I'm using the table tool, which you can find under the insert menu. And then you can list how many rows and columns you want for that table. And then for some other table interfaces, you can add extra things subsequently. Like you can specify which cells are the table headers and which ones are the row headers or column headers. So those are sort of the tools. Try to remember these when I talk about the principles in the next couple slides. But in general, this is what most different platforms, whether you're using Google Docs or another one, many of them have very similar interfaces to these. So for accessible hyperlinks, these are some of the things to keep in mind as you're making them. Again, use understandable link text. So don't just put in the URL alone, but instead make sure that it's descriptive. So for instance, much as Paul has already shown us, you could add the full URL, that's the example on the left, or on the right, you can see the descriptive text about the ITRC. This, when I first started writing for the web, this felt very counterintuitive to me because I thought the good principle was to be as transparent as possible and show somebody this is where the link is taking you because you can see the full URL. But then once I realized that all these tools let you put in the URL and then put whatever descriptive text you want above the top, as I just mentioned in that previous slide, someone really, really sneaky could use a different looking URL string as the text. And so they could just be rickrolling me that way. So instead of assuming that the URL that you're looking at is actually the thing it will take you to, you could hover over it if you're thinking of that security mindset. But in terms of creating your own things, your users hopefully know that what they see isn't a guarantee of where it's going to go. So instead, make sure to just have the descriptive link text. That's what's most usable for most of your audience. And also remember that underlines imply links online. So those of us who can see color and haven't printed these slides out can probably see that there's orange in the middle line for those links, and then there's a black underline on the third bullet point. And we might know in this context that some of those are going to be operable links and some of them are not. But if you'd printed this out on paper, your students might easily assume that the words links online should work as a link. So it's best just to avoid, when you're writing online, it's best to avoid underlining. So instead, italics can be used for emphasis or use bold instead. Those are some of the best principles for making accessible hyperlinks. And for accessible tables, again, use your platform's table tool and Google Documents. The table tool in there will reliably copy and paste a table into other platforms. Simplify your table structure. It's less frequent now than I remember years ago, but sometimes I have seen very complicated HTML tables where they'll have at the top a list of states with different things, then another section of data about specific counties or other demographic areas. So things where you have different data, separate that into different tables. So it doesn't need to all just be a single monster table. It's usable for all of your audience if it's broken out into smaller, more understandable pieces. Also, again, identify which cells are the headers. In Google Docs specifically, you can pin the heading row. If you hover over it, you'll see a little pin icon. In other platforms, there are other ways to do it that will also let you do that for the heading of a column as well as by row, depending on the platform that you're using. And again, use multiple tables as relevant, break them into smaller atomic bits of data structures instead of trying to just pile them all into one monster table. And when you can, try to add a caption for context so people know the years that you're discussing, people have an understanding of what they are supposed to be getting about this table from reading this table before they actually start engaging with it. Some tools let you click to add a caption. Other ones, you can just add it in text next to it, but it's a good practice, whatever platform you have, to make sure that your students or other learners understand the context of what this data is meaning to convey. So up next, Rick will moderate any questions and answers that we have for today.
Thanks, Ryan. And I am Rick, but this is not a Rick roll, just to make sure. So just if you have any questions that come up in the future, there's a few different ways you can find information. We have our Tiger Tracks Moodle ISU site. And over here also, we have this QR scanner code, so you can scan this if you want to find these links in the future. But the Tiger Tracks Moodle ISU is a repository of documents that we've created that explain all kinds of aspects of Moodle, how to use Moodle, accessibility, all kinds of things. So if it's ever really late at night and you want to learn stuff, but we're closed, that's a great way to figure out things. We have the Wednesday webinar video library, so you can see all of our past webinars that we've recorded, and they're in there. We have our accessibility resources. So if you have accessibility specific questions, you can go to that page and find more in-depth materials on how to create materials that are accessible. You can meet with the ITRC. As always, you can email us at itrc@isu.edu. We do our best to reply as soon as possible. You can call us at 208-282-5880. We have a team that works on answering the phones. We're here 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. most days, with limited support from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. a few nights a week. You can also come down to the Obler Library, room B17. We have a computer lab down here. You're welcome to work and have someone work with you if you have any questions. You can also just come down and visit, work on your classes, anything you want. You can also create on-demand appointments. So we can meet with you over Zoom, on the phone, or in person. You can select anyone from this and you can see their calendar and set up an appointment that way. And then future Wednesday webinars. So if you want to find out what's going on with our future webinars, you can watch for Idaho State Today. That's the email that goes out twice a week for staff and faculty explaining what's going on at ISU. You can also check the ISU events calendar. That has a list of our upcoming webinars. So thanks for joining us today. If you have any suggestions or any questions for us, please let us know.